Hello, good evening, and welcome back. China refuses to apologise to Australia for fake soldier image because they're trying to push a message instead. And if they're not technically factually accurate, it doesn't matter. They're just trying to push an agenda. I bet AOC would be proud. So this is coming on the back of the UN Council to hear about human rights violations of the Western powers, predominantly America, but also, of course, Australia has their own time as well, and China is getting in on it because China and Australia are inexplicably linked. For the main universities, a quarter of Australian students are Chinese. About 1 in 5,000 Chinese people are in Australia as students, which is incredible. And China is the main buyer of Australian exports of minerals. In fact, they take a third of the total exports, so more than second, third, and fourth place combined. So when you're that reliant on a country, quite a despot country, then you have to be careful about how you treat them. Otherwise, if you make it difficult for them politically, they will make it difficult for you economically. And that is what they're doing here. They're not exactly an ideal partner to have or a trading relationship to procure. So what was this one about in particular? Well, this tweet here from Li Jianzhao, saying, shocked by murder of Afghan civilians and prisoners by Australian soldiers, we strongly condemn such acts and call for holding them accountable. With the doctored image here, suggesting a Australian soldier holding a knife to the throat of an Afghan child, and who is holding the sacrificial lamb, if you will, with the subtitles here, don't be afraid, we're coming to bring you peace. Yes, very, very satirical, of course. So, of course, there's been incredible pushback from Australia, well, from some of them. Not so much the Liberal Party, of course, if they're already under investigation because of too many donations, mainly from Huang Zhangmo, in particular, the Chinese billionaire that's donated $2.7 million over a 4-year period, and another 1.8 million for a think tank, which is just a propaganda arm for China. But several million have been invested in Australia, as in lobbying, because the rules for foreign interference or foreign donations to Chinese officials, to Australian officials, is very lacking, essentially. So, yeah, sure, they limit it to $5,000 amounts, but they just combine them and it's from all these different restaurant staff. So there's 100,000 here. Yeah, but it's only 5,000 each, so there's clearly no problem. Yes, and then well, we have a think tank, which is clearly non-partisan and it's apolitical, and we need Australian people, and yeah, we're going to pay you 6-figure salaries to join this. Yep, and you're also a high-ranking politician in Australia, yet no conflict of interest here whatsoever. And similar thing with media outlets, of course. So, why don't you come out to China, see how good it is, all expenses paid, just like what the USSR did. And of course, for them, it was just keep them drunk all the time, don't show them the bad things, and don't allow them to ask questions, just show them some niceties and keep them intoxicated so they think that everything is fine and lovely, as Bernie Sanders would attest to as well, of course. But, Australia, with a law passed not so long ago, in order to try and crack down on foreign interference, China haven't taken this very kindly. Because, yeah, sure, it was a couple of years ago, and they're just, we're just concerned about any foreign interference whatsoever. So, well, this seems to be predominantly aimed at China. And, as I said at the top, that the trading partnerships are too well linked. And you can watch a Wendover Productions video called Australia's China Problem, if you wish to go into the exact details of that. And, of course, China Uncensored, if you wish for particular examples, going back into various Australians being intertwined with the Chinese party, including having a house raided. And, in fact, one Chinese student, because of the Confucius Institute, which is from the Chinese CCP, into the Australian universities in order to see what the students are doing. That when one student spoke out about the CCP and went, oh yeah, we're not such a fan, we actually prefer Hong Kong and their freedom. So, well, just coincidentally, a couple of days later, your parents were taken by the CCP. Just a coincidence. We're clearly not spying on you at all. Yeah, these things happen. Of course they do. And so more recently, two Australian diplomats have been evacuated from China. They've just left China. They've left it for their own protection, of course. And a couple of Australian academics have been banned from entering China. But of course, you don't hear much about this because China has bought out a lot of the Western media. And if they've got communism in the name, then they must be good, according to places like the BBC, of course. But, credit where it's due and blame where it's due as well. Australia's made mistakes, and that is what was being pointed out here. So, the Australian Defence Force said it had found credible information that 25 Australian soldiers were involved in the murders of 39 Afghan civilians and prisoners between 2009 and 2013. So, on Monday, China joined the widespread condemnation of the findings, now under a police investigation, but the graphic doctored image shared by Foreign Ministry spokesman Li Jianzhao has triggered furious reactions in Canberra and beyond. Canberra actually being the capital, not Sydney, despite only having 400,000 people, and being 70 miles from the coast instead of one of the four main coastal cities in Australia. So, as Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said, Beijing should be utterly ashamed for sharing the repugnant image and demanding an apology. But no, they didn't. They just doubled down. So when you see China's response here, you can understand why you need someone like Trump in America to deal with them, instead of someone like Beijing Biden, rip off from Beijing Bob Moss of Australia, for reasons that are quickly apparent when you look into his shady dealings. Chinese embassy say the accusations made are simply to serve two purposes. One is to deflect the public attention from the horrible atrocities by certain Australian soldiers. The other is to blame China for the worsening of bilateral ties. There may be another attempt to stoke domestic nationalism, it said in a statement. And this is just textbook gaslighting. As terrible as it is what China are doing, you've also got to respect the tactics that they're pretty effective and strong out of the gate. So, saying to deflect public attention from the horrible atrocities by certain Australian soldiers. So you just double down and say, no, it's really bad. We're not going to admit to any wrongdoing, and we're just going to remind everybody of how you did things badly. The other is to blame China for the worsening of bilateral ties, which is to point out the obvious and what is actually true, but just try and frame it in, just an absurd way in order to then cast doubt onto what is actually true. And there may be another attempt to stoke domestic nationalism, which is incredibly hypocritical, seeing as the, should we say, patriotism in China isn't for China, it's for the Chinese Communist Party. So the first two tactics here are not very nice or friendly, but they are very effective, and they are similar to what Donald Trump has done historically as well. So you don't acknowledge what's been said, you just double down with what you said in order to remind everybody of your initial message, and then the other one is to say, okay, well, it's your fault that this is happening. So that it's a very cheeky tactic, but it's clearly effective. So they go on to say, it's our advice that the Australian side face up to the crimes committed by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan, hold those perpetrators accountable, and bring justice to the victims, the statement added. Virtue signalling at its finest. Say everything, do nothing. Bilateral relations between China and Australia have been deeply strained this year after Canberra led calls for a probe into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, China are not for openness at all, and that's being seen here. So China was saying, yes, we need an investigation, we need to hold these people accountable, and at the same time, don't investigate us, don't hold us accountable. It's what China do the whole time. And again, it's just... I know it seems to be a habit recently that it just seems to be the same story again and again and again, just fresh examples of it because it isn't being widely acknowledged. And the same go for the BBC, that at least they'll mention it kind of in passing, at a glance, and they're not going to go into, oh, well, what is happening in the concentration camps in China? What is China doing in sub-Saharan Africa? Maybe you want to have a look at that. And if you're pointing out racism and nationalism and death squads, maybe you want to have a look at that. And then imprisoning political dissidents. Why don't you have a look at them instead of bigging them up? And why didn't you do actual journalism into China? And if you want to talk about the environmental effect, then why don't you go into China instead of saying, oh, well, China said that they would they would try and hit a target, so aren't they good? It's like, what? As in what they were predicted to do if they changed nothing and they just allowed things to go on as they did. Oh, and they're going to hit it? What a surprise. Then again, maybe it is a surprise that a governmental entity can actually have an accurate prediction at this point. Woo. But they said there have also been ongoing discussions about Beijing's alleged interference in Australian affairs. Yeah, millions of dollars of donations over the past 12 years at least. While economic tensions have grown with trade stoppages and tariffs imposed by China, including tariffs of up to 200% on Australian wine. And as I say, when you're that reliant on one country, you're fucked. On Tuesday, Premier Ardern said New Zealand had directly raised concerns with Chinese authorities. It was an unfactual post, and of course that would concern us, so that is something we have raised directly in the manner that New Zealand does when we have such concerns, she told reporters in Parliament with the capital Wellington. In the capital Wellington. Yeah, good. And who else is going to come to Australia's aid this side of things? Because you've also got to think that Australia are taking a leaf out of China's book when it comes to, locking people up. If you look at Melbourne and Victoria more widely, for how they're treating coronavirus victims there. So yeah, what is Australia doing? It doesn't seem to know what it is on about. And bear in mind, it had a similar setup as the US did, but of course they got 25 million instead of 330 million people as a population. But you could say that's a geography problem because of the desert in the middle. Oh dear. But this is the state of play. So it's another thing that China are doing that people don't want to call out because otherwise they're going to be fucked as well. And, well, if Beijing Biden gets in, good luck. Your best bet is to start learning Chinese. So let's hang on to our freedoms while we have them. And, hey, always try and hold these tyrannical governments accountable and not let it happen to us. Because that's why you're not hearing about individual Chinese people speaking out inside of China. It's not because they're happy, it's because they're silenced, killed, and their organs are harvested. Even just if you're essentially doing yoga, Falun Gong, which is essentially yoga. There are too many people, there are more in that group than the CCP. Oh, well then make it illegal and harvest their organs. They're going to be healthy. Oh yeah, well we know that we said it was a good thing to do just a few years back, but now they're clearly terrible and there was a false flag attack in order to condemn them. So now it's illegal. Great. You really want those people to be your allies? Think again. But as always, let me know what you guys think down below. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think, well, no, Australia were wrong, and hey, okay, so the image was doctored and wrong, but the point still stands, and yes, I know that China have done bad things in the past, but so have everybody. So if there's actually a time when there's been an investigation and we can find these things, then it is worth pointing it out in order to have it resolved. Any victory is still a victory. Or if you think, what the fuck are China doing? They're just trying to throw shade on another country because they don't want to be investigated themselves and it's all smoke and mirrors. Now, fuck them. Why don't we look into what they're doing instead? Why don't we all come together and deal with the elephant in the room? Either way, let me know down below. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, until next time, have a good one.